Welcome to the Totum Podcast. I'm Tim Irvin here with my partner, Dr. Stacy Irvin.
We are super excited that you decided to join us. We're coming to you from a live gym at Totum Life Science. Tim and I have worked in this industry for over 30 years, meaning that we have tons of great things to share with you.
Not only that, but we have great guests who will help to educate both of us and you with all things wellness.
Thanks so much for tuning in.
Welcome to this episode of the Totum Podcast, where we are talking about all things running and specifically how to get prepared for outdoor running and make sure that you get the best out of your performance, as well as minimizing injury. We're happy to have Victoria Lavinskas here, Bachelor of Science, Master's of Physiotherapy, FCAMT, which you can explain what those letters mean if you want to. I don't know. Clinic Director here at Totum.
Yep.
The Running Physio is another title that people have used with you. I know you've got Grammy wins and Oscar wins as well. So, I mean, it's just pretty impressive. And we're able to get you here talking on the Totum Podcast. And Stace, I know that you, obviously, you're a heptathlete in university and currently are one of the coaches at U of T High Performance Track Club, working on strength and conditioning, but obviously where you can input on the running side of things.
Yeah, I'm treating a lot of them. The track athletes are often injured. It just is part of the thing. So yes, I have ideas as well on this.
And I'm just a chump who's going to ask some questions. You know, I might have.
But you like to run.
Yeah, I might have run 5 marathons, including Boston, but I don't know. That's not worth mentioning, I don't think. Anyway, so question number one.
Yep.
Why should anybody care about preparing for running before they get back outside to start running?
I think as a physiotherapist that works with a ton of runners, I see so many running injuries, and so many of these are either towards the end of a long running plan, like getting close to a marathon, a half marathon. And then a lot of them are, hey, I just started running again, and, you know, my usual knee, shin, back pain has started up. I've always had this. I can't seem to shake it off. And most people, like in a lot of things, go from 0 to 100. They're, springtime's coming. It's nice out. I want to go for a run. I haven't run in 6 months, but I'm not thinking I got to do this slowly. I'm thinking like, I was doing 5K just 6 months ago, so I'm going to do an easy little 4, and that's going to be fine. People don't realize just how much load that is, and how specific kind of running is, and how your body needs to adapt to anything really. Like, I think that a lot of the things that I've learned about running and progressive loading applies to kind of any sport and activity. But we tend to think of running as like, oh, it's like fast walking. Like, and I walk a ton, so running's gonna be fine. And a 5K is just a 5K. I hear that a lot, and people most of the time tend to just go too far, too fast into it. And they don't also prepare their bodies in ways that are not even how to get into running, but do I have the proper footwear? Is my footwear like updated? Is it old? Is my body moving well? Do I have the right strength in my core, in all these, so many muscles that we use in running? Like, am I prepared to do this? Do I have a plan about how I'm going to go about it? People just want to get out there and they want to run. And I think that's why people often do go too fast and get injured for those reasons.
Well, I think,
and we have winter.
And yeah,
we have winter. Yeah.
People stay off the road.
Winter where we are stuck inside with crappy weather.
Usually.
How
spring
this year's been very strange. Yeah. But I do see, like we've had a few days, even in February, we had the days that went into the teens, and I did see, I'm out with the dogs, and I see a ton of runners, and they are so happy and going for it, but that can definitely cause problems. But I do think part of that energy around that, oh my God, this day, right? And then you get out and you're like, I just want to keep going. Yeah. And it's not always the best idea.
I think a perfect example of this is a friend of ours who we introduced you to him, who has been cycling like a very serious cyclist, who decided he wanted to start running again. And that idea that you mentioned about, just go out and run a 5K, I think that he was sort of 3 or 4 runs in. He was like, you know what, I'm going to push a little bit harder this time.
Yep.
And he hadn't run like this type of running for years. He was in great shape, but just not for running.
Great shape cardio.
And then he ended up with an Achilles related issue that was quite lengthy and could have been prevented by just slow down the volume ramp up.
And like, you can stop me if I'm going ahead too much, because I just love talking about running and all things physio related. But also, I think one of the things I often tell about my clients is running is such a great sport because it's so symmetrical that it brings out all the asymmetries that you may have that are sleeping in your body. So, you know, he is in great shape. Cardio is not an issue, but he hadn't run in a long time. He starts running, and all of a sudden this like minor little weakness that existed in his ankle becomes apparent because he's doing something where he's using that muscle more, or those muscles more, but he's also doing something that he's supposed to be doing the same on both sides. And all of a sudden the body says, just a second, like, I'm having a hard time on this side. And that's where those injuries start to kind of come up. So, you know, checking that body first and seeing all those little things, that's what I do with a lot of my clients. Is I know what kind of mobility you need and what strength you need and what muscles are really important. And I can already tell you this is weak, so this is probably going to happen. Is that perfect example of someone who's like generally fit, has no issues, starts running and something comes up. And that's why we have so many running clients, because running is really one of those, you know, loaded symmetrical sports that really brings out those asymmetries in mobility and strength and all that stuff.
I love that. I love that description, and I love that about running as well. And I think you're probably the same as me. I love it as a provider too, because when I'm working with sprinters, it's a really nice hard end to, did we do a good job or not? And sometimes when we're at work, you know, you're saying to someone, does it feel better? Okay, good. You know, what do you think? And lots of our patients who don't have running as a big part of their life or aren't competitive athletes, they're like, yeah, I think I felt it, but I forgot about it. You know, which you're like, okay, that's a good sign. But then you shift to where you have a sprinter or a runner, and the things that you do with treatment really have an impact. And then you can like see it right up there on the board based on their time or their race or how it went, which I think is really exciting. And I think for lots of people, it's a really good way to learn, okay, I thought this was okay, but maybe it's not okay. And now I need to take a step back and do a little bit more work to make it better, to make my time better, to feel better when I run.
Yeah.
So my question is, what would be something like say kind of the top 3 things that you would do in an assessment when you're looking at a runner?
How specific do you want me to get? I mean, I'll start broad, and you can tell me how specific you want me to get through there. But the top 3 things, there are 3 sections to my running assessments. One is going to be what I like to call the biomechanical assessment. So, you know, basically like mobility, strength, flexibility, stability, dynamic stability, like how stable are you when you move, of mostly the lower body, obviously because we use that a lot in running. And that already gives me little flags of like, ooh, this may be an issue, this may be an issue, this may be an issue, and things that we want to work on to optimize things. Then I moved into more of like the running specific stuff, where we usually talk about running shoes. And I will do an assessment. Obviously, I'm a physiotherapist, so my running shoe assessment is, and we can go into detail on that later, is really about like, is this allowing your body to do what it's meant to do, is kind of how I see the shoe. I'm not like an expert in like what type of fabric that is. And then the third part is usually on the treadmill, having a look at actual running technique and then going from there. So I feel like there's, and what kind of interventions or that we can do to the technique to improve that. And so I think those are the 3 main pillars of all of my running assessments and all my work with my runners, is like, what do you look like on the table / how are your joints moving? How are your muscles, you know, working? What kind of footwear are you wearing? Because that's the most important part of your equipment when you're running. And then, you know, what are you doing? How are you running? And how can we affect those 3 things? And where are we going to have the biggest impact for each? Because for each person it's different, right?
Right.
So those are the 3 big things, I guess, that I would assess.
I like that.
So one thing on the second one, which is the footwear allowing your body to do what it's supposed to do. What does that mean?
So good question, Tim. So I always explain to people that the human body is made to run. We have all the muscles necessary to absorb the shock and from running and then push off. And so what I try to generally explain to people, in a shoe, you're looking for two main things. You're looking for, you want your foot to be able to feel the ground, so it knows what's happening. And you want the shoe to allow your foot to move so it can react to the ground. And, a big term that gets people all riled up is minimalism. But the way that, and people think of minimalism as like your five fingers, your super thin shoe that has no cushion, your 0 millimeter drop, and we can go into that later. I see minimalism as like, can your foot do what it's supposed to do? That's what it really means. It's not about the thinnest, least protective shoe ever. It's like, can your foot act as it's supposed to? And again, we can go into details about shoes later, but the more your foot allows your foot to feel and react, then the better it is. It's not supposed to do the work of your foot, because that's where we see a lot of injuries actually, is when shoes are very like stability and control and lots of cushioning, and it's going to protect you, but actually it dumbs our feet down, and that creates a lot of other issues up the chain. And like, stop me if I'm going into too much detail, but ideally, we talk about running as being a high impact sport. It is an impact sport. We are landing. We're having to accept that load, push off. It is high impact. However, there are good ways and bad ways of running. And when we run in poor form, then yes, we can add a lot of load to our joints and our bones. And so issues like, ankles, shins, knees, hips, lower backs, if you are running in poor form, you can add a lot of load and stress to those joints. And people think of running as that, like, I'm adding load and stress. However, if you're running in proper form, and you're running in the right shoes, and you have the right technique, and you've worked on strength and other components, you should be using your muscles to accept that load and to push off. And that type of loading of muscles or of joints, is very healthy. Like, we actually want to be loading our joints. We just want to load them in a cushiony way. You don't want to be smacking on the joints. You want them to learn how to accept that. That type of pressure on joints is actually very healthy. It's a way that we add nutrition to the joints. People, I think, don't always understand that. They think of impact as this bad thing. And so that's part of my job, to explain why this is actually a positive thing. And I hear it all the time with clients who have knee OA arthritis, and their GPs have said, like, you can never run again.
Yes.
Because you have OA in your knee.
I was just going to say that. It's such a common message, and it's so frustrating.
So frustrating.
That there are many health practitioners out there that say, oh, your running days are over.
Yeah.
Don't run. Why would you do that?
Yeah.
It's terrible.
I'd say the only time I tell people that can be true is if they have a lot of something like osteoporosis, and they've had lots of fractures of the femoral head, or the long bone in the leg, kind of at the hip. There are that's a bit of a risky thing, where if you are very prone to fractures, and you've had fractures in the hips before, sometimes running, even in really great form, can be a little bit too much load. But there are, so many clients that come see me and say, I don't think I can run. And I was like, well, why? And then I'm like, well, no, that's not true. And actually, you have knee OA. If we can teach your knee to load well, it's actually good for it.
It's going to be better.
Which is like, they're like, what do you mean? My doctor said I couldn't. And I'm like, no, we can.
And just for clarity, knee OA is not from the Matrix. It is knee osteoarthritis. For listeners and viewers.
Thank you for keeping it all real.
Yeah. Okay.
One quick thing about the point that you just made is, sometimes when we are talking about who can run and who shouldn't be running, I think once you've done a marathon and you stand at the finish line and see who comes across, it is every body type, it is every age. Some people are running with one form, and then you'll see the next person come through and they look completely different. And that was a real education. We started doing marathons a long time ago, and I didn't realize the large variety of people that could train and run a marathon. And it made me rethink, because I was coming from a track background where I'm used to really high level running. And then I see all these people doing the marathon, no problem. Some of them doing it faster than me, that if I watched them run, I wouldn't have thought that that would be the case. And it's the idea of adaptation. It's if you put the volume in properly, if you are supported, so you're getting good advice about your training and how much volume to increase, you can run a marathon. There's very few people that cannot. And I think the messaging comes out a lot like, no, you're not a runner. Well, it's such a frustrating statement because we were all clearly designed to run. It's a fundamental movement pattern.
Absolutely.
Okay, so question, if a person if this is their feet, these are the toes, and they tend to do this, so the arches fall in and maybe their knees kind of come together a little bit, so that's one. The second is the opposite of that, where maybe they're a little bow-legged and the really high arches and the weight seems to be on the outside of the feet. So if we talk about shoes, I mean, that's a good practical example of anybody listening or watching. You'd be like, okay, what do I do? I have my arches. So how do the shoes impact that sort of thing?
So that's a really good question. So when it comes to shoe prescription, I think that some stores, some people who sell shoes will look at your foot and say, this is the type of shoe that you need, which actually is a fallacy. So a good example is some people are born with flat feet, as in their arches, when they just stand, are completely flat. And a good test to know actually if you really have flat feet is take your foot off the ground. So as in take your weight off of your foot and see what your foot does. So if you are standing and your feet are flat and then you take your foot off of the ground or you take the weight off your leg and all of a sudden you have this big arch, then okay, this is how your foot has an arch, and you don't have sufficient kind of strength to support that arch when you're adding weight to it. Whereas some people have no arch, you take it away from the ground, they still have no arch. This is just the way your foot is. This is structured, and that there's a lot of people out there who have flat feet. That is not a problem. I have to tell people that all the time. You don't need orthotics just because you have flat feet. And so the shape of your foot isn't really important. It's important how you use your foot. So, and again, I'm not a fan of anti-pronation shoes for running. If we're talking about standing, walking, a whole bunch of other things, that's a whole other category that like I could go into, but because we're talking about running, I want to focus on running. Everyone's foot should be able to control these things, those caving in that we call kind of more that pronation or overpronation, and the opposite being that supination. Our feet all do those movements. They pronate, they supinate. When you land, you should be pronating. Overpronation is the common term we hear, is when you're not controlling that pronation properly and you're just going too far into it. And then oversupination would be the kind of opposite movement. And supination is normal when we're pushing off. Our foot has to supinate.
And pronation is landing on the outside-ish of my feet and then rolling to the inside?
You're not necessarily landing on the outside, but as you land, the inside of your arch is coming down towards the inside. So it's a bit of a roll down of the inside of the sole of the foot. Which I'd say is the most common thing that we see. And that's, so again, it's not so much about the shape of your foot. And it's not even about, when I talk about shoes, it's not even about like, okay, well, what can you do with your foot? It's, okay, I need you to be able to use these muscles to control this. How am I going to teach you to do that? I want you to have a shoe that encourages you to do that. And I want you to do exercises that are going to teach you how to do that. And I want you to have a technique that makes it easy for you to do that. That's kind of where everything comes together. It's because everybody can use those muscles. And the fallacy that a lot of people, or the issue that people have is they say, okay, well, I overpronate, so I'm going to buy shoes that are anti-pronation, that, elevate my arches, which in theory, when you think about that, you're like, that makes sense. But the more cushioning and stability and support you add to the shoe, the stiffer a shoe gets, the less your foot feels the ground. And what we were saying before is it's so important for your foot to understand what's going on, because if you're adding all this cushioning and this stability, when you land, your foot doesn't feel the ground. It's not feeling those little intricacies of that little dip in that little rock you just stepped on or whatever. And if it doesn't feel that, then your foot can't possibly take out all of its tools because it doesn't know. So it says, well, I don't really know what's going on. So you know what? Let's just land wherever the cushion is because that's the safest thing for us to do. And where's the cushion? It's on the heel. And that's where striking comes out, which we can dive into. But that's where like a person's foot, like posture, their anatomy does not dictate what kind of shoe they should get. The only thing that is important, so like the third aspect to like your foot should feel the ground, it should react to the ground. Like a part of that is your foot needs to be comfortable in the shoe. So you might have shoes that have all the right specs that we talk about, but then you put it on and you're like, doesn't quite fit, like something's rubbing on this side, or I don't feel quite comfortable. That's also not the right shoe for you. So some people have very wide feet. They need a shoe that fits that wide foot. So that's the only, I'd say, like anatomical difference or characteristic that will affect what type of shoe you get. You need a wide toe box if you have a wide forefooter, like where your toes are. But otherwise, it actually doesn't play into it at all. And a lot of times people have come to see me because they have shoes that are correct whatever their foot is doing. But they're coming to see me because they're having issues with running because their technique is off because they're wearing this shoe that doesn't allow. It's just this huge kind of, everything kind of falls in together, really.
A lot of marketing, too, goes into these shoes. And I think they kind of prey upon people, like with any type of advertising, that the shoe will be the answer. And in so many cases, it's the opposite. It's that you've lost some strength because of the shoes that you've been wearing. And it might not be the shoes you're wearing to run. Could be the shoes you're wearing during the day. When I'm with the athletes that I work with, our warm-ups are all done in our socks. So we have a whole range of exercises that we do that are feet strengthening and that are, working through range of motion on our feet. And it's very interesting. And one of the main reasons that we do that is because they're track athletes, they're going to be in spikes, which are essentially bare feet with the spikes on the front of it. There's no, there's really no support in the spike. And what we have found over the years is that they'll be okay in their fall season because they're in their training shoes and they're doing most of their running in the training shoes. Then we get into competitive season and it's spikes and spikes and spikes and more spikes and track meets and your hours and your spikes. And that's when everything starts to break down, because their feet haven't been strengthened enough prior to that season. And with COVID and the pandemic, what I found, they're teenagers, they were really more susceptible to all the foot injuries. So we see shin splints and plantar fasciitis and all these things because they hadn't been out and about in the world strengthening their feet, right? And a lot of them will wear like those Converse and things like that have no support, or the Uggs. The girls wear the Uggs; those have no support. But they're walking to school, they're strengthening their feet, they're strengthening, their lower legs. And so when we started back right after that time, I knew I have to dedicate. We have an hour and a bit of a training session, 15 minutes. The first 15 minutes is all leg and like lower leg and feet strengthening. And it's, it has really paid off for them, but I think it's a good routine for many runners to get into, is like, you got to focus on that.
Well, and what's going to happen when we have another nice day is people that haven't run since September are going to be like, quad stretch, hamstring stretch, literally about this fast, a little bit of calf stretching. 5K. Let's go. Exactly. And so, these are high performance athletes that are running all the time, like basically 6 days a week, maybe a day off, and they have to do this work. So what makes anybody else think that they're going to get away with a few runs without problems and not do some version of this?
Okay. So thinking about that, what would you say? Let's just take an average person. Okay. So, let's say I sit at a desk for 8 hours a day on a computer. I've got, tightness in the front of my body. I've got tight hips in the front. My feet are weak. My hip mobility is kind of limited. What would be your top 4 exercise, or you can pick the number. Okay. Like, what are the things that I should start doing right now, saying that I'm going to start running in a month from now?
So first off, there's different, obviously, areas of the body that need to be very mobile, need to be strong, to be active. So you just talked about like sitting, the hip flexors are going to be tight, or the front of your hips are going to be tight. When we run, we need good hip extension, so that kind of leg kind of being pushed behind you. And sitting is basically the opposite of that, like leg being pushed behind you. One of my favorite exercises I give to people is a kind of, I like to call it a high chair lunge plus glute max activation. So that's what I like to call it. I don't have a life plan.
Yeah, it's really catchy.
But where you basically will put one foot up on either a chair or on some stairs, something that's stable.
Yeah.
And you, keeping your trunk nice and upright, are just going to kind of lunge forward. So that's going to do two things. So you're going to be loading that front leg as you kind of lunge forward. And then it's going to be creating that extension of that back leg, stretching the front of your hip, which is usually probably very tight from sitting for a long period of time. And in that position, I like to get people to actively try to squeeze or contract their glute max, so the big glute muscle, which is basically your main driver in your push-off phase for running, and kind of let that back heel come up. And so I like to do like 10 reps of that with a nice 5-second kind of contraction at the end, which is a great way to, you're kind of in a running position and stance. If you think about it, one leg is in that flexion or that swing phase, the other leg is
elevated. That's where you elevate that front leg, is because that's what happens in your actual running.
Exactly. So you don't, it's not just a regular.
Like if it was me, I just need to elevate it 2 inches.
Just 2 inches. But you kind of get a nice kind of hip mobility combined with glute activation, combined with stability work, because you can't start this holding onto something, but eventually you should be able to do it without it. So I love exercises that get like a whole bunch of different things in at the same time, because it's easy. It's an easier buy-in to do it. So that's definitely a big one.
I love that one.
I think most stuff I would say would be concentrated to the feet. So like heel raises are something that kind of, I guess, might seem obvious when you're running, but I tell my runners, like, you should be able to do 10 nice, high, controlled heel raises on one side at a time to be able to, like, that for me is like the baseline.
Right.
Like, think about how many times you are pushing your body weight off with one leg.
That's really good.
Your glute, for sure, is, your glutes, your hamstrings are pushing you forward. Your quads are helping as well, but your calf muscles are really important to push you forward as well. And that's one thing I see so much weakness in is not necessarily the big calf muscles. So we have two main big calf muscles, are gastrocnemius or gastroc and soleus. So those are really the movers that push us forward in that heel raise. But then you have all the stability muscles. Some of my favorites are tibialis posterior or tib post and peroneus longus. And those are on both the inside and the outside of the calf. And you can think about them as the stabilizers that prevent the ankle from kind of wobbling in and out. Peroneus longus is amazing because it not only prevents your ankle from rolling out, but based on its attachment underneath basically the ray of the first toe. So like if you continued from the first toe up towards your ankle, it attaches there. And so when it contracts, it actually pulls the big toe down and allows you to push off from kind of a nice straight base off your foot. So those guys are so important. And when I see people, I watch people do heel raises, I can either see ankles rolling out, which often is from a past ankle sprain, that classic thing that people don't take care of, because I rolled my ankle, it was painful for a bit, I hobbled, and then it was fine. I went back to whatever it was. And those things always come to bite you in the ass. Can I say something? You could say
whatever you want.
And so we see that ankle kind of rolling out, and then that translates into, when I watch clients run on the treadmill and they're landing and pushing off from the outside of the foot instead of actually from kind of the middle of the foot. They're not spreading their weight evenly across the ball of the foot. They're kind of rolling off as they go. So that's going to be a less stable push off. That's going to affect everything up the chain. Your foot is the first thing to hit the ground. If it's not doing a good job, other guys are going to struggle or have to kick in to help. I can tell if you're not using tibialis posterior properly, because when you do a heel raise, your heels should actually supinate or invert and do this little kind of inside roll at the very end. And some people lack that supination. And tibialis posterior is one of our most important muscles to actually elevate that arch that we were talking about before and prevent that overpronation. So, if those muscles aren't really kicking in properly, you need strong calves, but you need strong ankle stabilizers, because that really will affect so many things up the chain. So a good heel raise is often something I prescribe, and based on what I see. So if somebody has a beautiful, stable, bilateral, as in 2-leg heel raise, and then I check their single leg heel raise, and that's where they start to, that looks a bit harder, because a lot of people can do heel raise 2 legs easy.
It's not easy. Okay. I like that you outlined 10 because I do them all the time. And this is a fun fact, is that there has been research, it came out quite a while ago, but it said that ankle strength is one of the most limiting factors to our mobility as we get older.
Okay.
And so that really made me think we have to focus more on ankle strength. And it's funny because, we're in a gym right now. I always feel kind of dumb, going over to the side and doing my ankle raises, like I'm not really doing a real exercise.
Yeah.
But I just do them, and I do them all the time. And 10, 1 leg, doing them right is not easy. And this is coming from someone who does them all the time. You do them too, right?
Well, and I've got an imbalance based on an injury that I had not that long ago. I have still not back to normal, and it's been a couple of years.
How many do you do on average?
On a single leg, I do 15 on each side. My left side feels like
he's always flexing.
No problem.
On this. 15. My marathons at my 15.
Right side is terrible. I'm not. I already on the first rep, I know I'm not getting good quality.
Okay, so we have the lunge exercise, getting activation in the glute. I love that. That could be great for warm up too.
Exactly. I actually, so many of my exercises that I prescribe is rehab and
good for warm up
activation stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we have single leg. If you can't do 10 really good single leg heel raises, you might have an issue out in the world running, I would say.
So then there's a ton of different types of heel raises that you can do depending on what I see. So if you're, 2 of my favorite types of heel raises when with both legs going up, if I can see something there, a flaw, I'm not giving you a single leg heel raise. We're going to focus on this. And oftentimes we're using a ball either above. So if you think of your ankle, there's these bones sticking on each side. The inside little bone, which we call the medial malleolus. If you put a ball above that and you think about squeezing that ball as you come up, that actually helps that peroneus longus engage, and you should feel more stable on your forefoot, and you should feel it kind of engaging the outside of your calf a bit. If you put the ball below that medial malleolus or the inside bone, then your cue is to think of lifting the ball up as you come up, and then you're encouraging that tibialis posterior activation and that kind of rolling inversion we were talking about. Then if you can do a heel raise on both legs, nice and solid, but then single leg you're really struggling, I'm not going to give you something that you're really going to struggle with. You need to be able to do at least 10 reps of something good to be able to then work on that. So then I'll give you what we call an eccentric heel raise. So you're going to go up on 2, transfer down on 1. That eccentric load is something that we talk about a lot in physio, and so important for tendon strengthening and loading, and also just when you think about running, as you land, your calf is contracted and it's shortened. Your heel will descend a bit, sometimes down to the ground, sometimes not fully. That part is that eccentric portion where that calf slowly controls the lengthening. And that is a very important part of that loading and that landing. So if you can't eccentrically load your tendons, you're going to be in trouble when you're running. And then eventually getting to single leg stuff. And then you can add bands if you want to challenge different muscles. Yeah. But some form of a heel raise is very important, but it just depends on what your needs are.
Yeah, where you're at.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is great.
Any more exercises that we must do?
We hope you liked this episode, and if you did, please subscribe and share it with your family and friends.
We would love to hear from you. Follow us on social media. You could send us a DM or even come visit us in real life at Totum on King West. See you soon.